In this example, we're going to take a look at importing vectors from a third-party system, which in this case is DXF. And following the import, we're going to analyze the properties of the file and discuss the typical issues you may face. So let's start by creating a new job. And in this case, it's going to be a single-sided job. It's going to have a width of 42 inches, a height of 38, and a thickness of 3/4 inch, 0.75. Our Z0 will be from the material surface, and our XY datum position will be in the lower left-hand corner. So with that now, I have my square workspace, and I now need to think about bringing the vectors into this job space. So I'm going to go under File Operations and hit the Import Vectors, which I could also do with Drag Drop or File Import Vectors, but in this case under File Operations. I have a number of different 2D file imports that I can bring in, but I have my file already set up there, so I'm going to select my 3-leg table.dxf and immediately open that into this workspace. I was expecting it to maybe be drawn in my workspace, but clearly it's not. So what I now need to do is to zoom out to see exactly where the vectors exist. So I'm going to go up to my zoom menu at the top and select this middle option, which will zoom to everything in my part, and I clearly can see the vectors are shown in the lower left hand corner. Now this is the way they were originally created in the CAD system that it came from. So this was the XY location of the vectors with respect to the datum in that CAD package, and that datum has been honored when we've gone to import into the Vectric workspace, which is why our components are not necessarily appearing in our Vectric workspace, but in its original XY location from the creating CAD package. So what I now need to do is bring these vectors into my workspace. So I could drag and drop, etc., or I could hit F9 on the keyboard, which will center them on the middle of the workspace. But in this case, I'm going to go up to the Align Selected Objects under the Transform Objects menu. And at the top we have Align to Material, and I'm going to select the center option, which puts the vectors dead center of my workspace. I'm going to close that down now and zoom to the active view, and we clearly can see our white workspace and our vectors drawn on top of the screen. Okay, so we have now our 3 legs, our base and our top, and what I'm now going to do is just show you how that would all piece together. So we have our 3 leg pieces, which will slot together. They will in turn slot into the base, which we can see at the bottom, and also slot into the top in a sort of Mortise and Tenons style fit. Okay, so with that, going to come back to our workspace, and we know we're going to need to possibly make some modifications to get this all to fit together after we've machined it. But let's take a look at the layers that have been created as a result of importing this DXF file. So under our layer menu, we have 5 layers that have been created. Now the layer 1 was the layer that was created when we first set up the job. So with our blank Vectric job space, we had a layer 1 that was already created. Now there is no vectors on there on that layer. You can see by the blank page there are no sort of vector lines drawn on there, so that is empty, so we can delete that layer. Similarly, this layer 0, which came in from the DXF file, similarly has no vectors on it, so I can delete that layer, and we are left with 3: top part, vertical parts and base part, and we can draw those on and off to check that we can see which bits are on which layer. So with the base part, I can switch that off, on, off, on, and we can see that is clearly the base. We've got our vertical parts, which is probably our legs, and that's correct. So we have our 3 legs, and then we have our top part, the top of the table. Okay, so we've got 3 layers there. Currently the base part is active as shown there in bold, and in this case I'm going to select, say, top part to be my active layer. Therefore, if I create any new vectors, they will be automatically added onto the top part layer. Okay, so with that now, we've got to think ahead about how we're going to machine this. 2 things that we need to be bearing in mind is 1, the thickness of the material we're going to be using, and secondly, the tool we're going to be using to cut this. Okay, so if we have a look now at one of our legs and our top, we have a number of mortises in the top piece. We can see 2 that are slightly longer and 4 that are slightly shorter. We also have our tenons here, Okay, and there is a thickness to our tenons. So in this case, I'm going to be creating this out of 3/4 inch material, 0.75. So I need to make sure that the thickness of my tenons and my mortises is 3/4 inch. So let's take a look at that now. So we've got using the measure tool, and with that we go 0.72, so that's just a little shy. And we've got here, we've got 0.75, that's good. 0.75. Okay, so this looks like it's set up correctly for 3/4 inch. Now I need to make sure that the length of the tenons will actually fit into the mortises. So we've got the two longer ones here, so that here is 2 inches, and that should fit into this one here, which will be 2 inches, correct. And then we've got some of our smaller ones here, so we've got a what looks like a 1.5, and I think these are also 1.5. Okay, so I've established that with the material that we've going to be using, that dimensionally our drawing is correct. Okay, but now we have to think one step ahead about what tool we're going to be using to cut this. So with this now, we can clearly see we're going to be cutting a hole here where these mortises are, but I'm going to be using a 1/4 inch diameter end mill. Okay, so let's draw that up now. So I've got a 1/4 inch diameter. I'm just going to place that on the screen, close that out, and let's take a closer look at how this tool would machine around the inside of the mortise here. So it's going to come along now, and it's going to get to that corner, and it's going to be leaving a radius of material in that corner, which means the tenon will not fit into that area. Okay, so we're going to need to make a modification to this. Okay, so I'm going to delete that out now. So we need to essentially allow the tool to sort of come into the corner and create a little bit more extra room to allow the tenon to move into it. So we're going to go into the fillet command now, which is under the edit objects. Okay, and we're going to select the Dogbone fillet. Okay, which will allow us to remove extra material in the corner. So you can see that the icon changed on the screen, and as I move down into the corner, you can see the little tick mark come. So it means I can click on the corner, and it's going to add that Dogbone fillet. Okay, so I've added 4 fillets to this particular mortise. I'm just going to close that out now. We need to check that this will satisfy the tenon going into the mortise. So I'm going to pick that up now and simply put it into transform mode, hold the left hand mouse key on the midpoint and move that across to the midpoint of the mortise, and I can check the corner, and that looks nice. It's going to be a nice snug fit for the tenon inside the mortise. Okay, so with that I'm just going to hit Control Z to put that one back, and now I need to move ahead and add the fillets to the remaining mortises. So with that now, I'm just going to come up and quickly add these in. There's quite a few to do, so hopefully we'll quickly race through. So we're going to add all these fillets to the corners. And once we've done this, we then need to consider whether the tenons will actually fit into these. So I'm just going to go across to the base now, and we'll add those fillets in. Because the issue is not just about the machining of these slots, but also the fact that we're going to be leaving a corner on the tenons, so as the tenon moves into the mortise, it won't be able to fit flush with the top. Okay, so let's take a closer look at the issue that we're talking about here. We've got our 3/4 inch material here for our tenon, but of course we're going to be machining it with our radius, which if I place on the screen and then move into the corner, you'll be able to see we will be leaving a radius of material in that corner. We cannot produce a sharp corner with the tool wrapping around the corner. So what I need to do now is once again allow for that. Okay, so I'm going to delete that out, come back to our fillet command and select Dogbone Fillet and add that to the corners. This way, when we do push these pieces together, the tenon should fit nice and flush, or very close to flush, with the top and base. So I'm just going to complete those now, and then we'll look at the final issue, which is really how the 3 leg pieces are going to fit together. Okay, so we're just going to finish off those fillets and on the top there, and close that out. So we're close to being ready for machining now, but of course we now have these 3 leg pieces that are all going to come together, and we want to make sure that when they bind together all the tenons are at the same height, therefore they'll fit flush into the base and the top. So let's take a closer look now, and once again we're going to have the same issue of leaving a radius here, but I'm going to need to come back to the create fillet command, but rather than the Dogbone fillet we're going to use a T-bone fillet, just a different type of fillet here, and we can add these onto either of these 2 edges. So for instance we can either add them onto the bottom there or to the side. Okay, and in this case I'm going to do them sort of top and bottom, or so across. So I'm going to click on this now. If I move back across, I can click on it to remove, then go round to the other edge and add correctly. Okay, so I'm going to do this now to the others and just make sure that this will all piece together, bearing in mind we're using 3/4 inch material and a 1/4 inch diameter end mill. So I'm happy with the modifications I've done. Okay, so at the end of this we've created a new part, we've imported the vectors, we've checked everything about in terms of what's on what layer and got rid of any layers that we didn't need. We then looked at the material that we're going to use and the tooling that we're going to use, and made some allowances to make sure that when we do come to machine this, that once we've finished we can put it all together and it will fit just as we require. So with that now I'm ready to move on to the machining, which is a separate video, and I'd like to do a file, save as now, and save this as 3-legged table vectordrawing.crv file.